Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, HyFlex learning. So there's the main ones, and I'm sure there's some subsets, but there's some existing learning modes in adult education, right? There's in person, which, doesn't really we don't need to go into it that much. And then there's blended, right? So there's blended mode where oftentimes, usually the way blended works is the students are given now, this is the interesting thing about blended. People have been doing blended learning for a long time. Even, back in the day when people were getting their certifications or diplomas or degrees through the mail, right? Blended learning has been around for quite a while. So what that requires is, the person to do the work on the curriculum independently, right? Following a pre-written plan. And then they come to class prepared, either for assessment or to further engage in discussion or any kind of activity with the teacher, right? And so at the high school level or the middle school level, what that would mean is that they do the reading or the online activities at home, for homework, and then they come to the next day prepared, to engage in, a related activity that's more hands-on or immersive, that kind of gets away from the bookwork a little bit, or interactive if it is digital, right? Now, now let's talk about hybrid, right? Hybrid is definitely more modern. Hybrid, involves usually a combination of digital delivery of the curriculum and in person. So usually that means that the students and the instructors are in, the virtual space or the physical space, at any given time, right? So for example, like a more kind of, let's say, classic arrangement would be this, for example, let's say I'm taking a college class and 3 days a week or 4 days a week I am learning online, right, on Blackboard or Canvas or whatever dedicated courseware that the instructor is using. And then on Friday, Friday night, for 4 hours, or Friday morning for 4 hours, everyone meets in person, right? So for example, I know the CSUMB, their instructional design and technology program kind of worked on a similar, schedule, except they would meet maybe in person physically like twice or once a month, right? So very much on the digital side of, the hybrid. And then there's pure online and remote, which is, the student and the teacher are online 100% of the time. You know, um, it can be synchronous, which means, meetings are like what we're doing right now, whereas, meetings are happening in person. So usually the student, the adult learner, is doing the footwork for, the class meeting. They're doing the homework, they're doing the required reading or exercises and practice so they can come to the instruction ready for, the lecture or online discussion, right? And so that would be synchronous work. And then there's asynchronous. And for those of you who have ever done a course, for example, I know if you've done your credentialing through San Diego County Office of Education, right, their adult education credentialing course is almost asynchronous with a couple of exceptions, right? It's almost asynchronous, which means that the student is usually, either learning on a schedule and that's different from the teacher. That's why it's asynchronous, or they're learning independently, right? So, for example, if someone is taking a Coursera course in, let's say, cybersecurity, you know, then that's what and they would just learn at their own pace. Now, there is a difference, and I just want to, caution you because sometimes, especially in the last year or two, as you know, in person has now kind of taken over in education again, that online does not necessarily mean remote, right? There are some cases where a teacher can be online, but they're still on site. But there are also some, cases where, like, for example, not down, but up in around South San Francisco, right? Their ESL program, they actually do have remote classes where they hire teachers, from out of the area to teach online. That would be an example of a remote situation, right? So as you're explaining it, to your districts, right? If this is something that you want to do, know that, stress there is a difference between online and remote. Teacher could still be on site, still teach online, right? Which brings me to HyFlex, right? Um, so what's HyFlex Learning, right? So it's hybrid and flexible. It was created by Professor Brian Beatty from San Francisco State University. He, no, he's pretty much the one that codified HyFlex and kind of wrote down what it is and what it can do. It was at first created for educational technology graduate students, um and it was based on four guiding principles, right? And this is actually these are the four principles that I use when I design a course or when I help people with their courses. Is one, learner choice, two, equivalency or equity. Yvonne, I think, is being attacked by bats. um uh, Number three, reusability. Four, accessibility, right? And let's go a little deeper into what that is, right? Learner choice. So what that means is the learner can participate in person, they can participate online synchronously or online asynchronously, right? So that means, and the learners can switch between those modes. So the way I run my course classes is if my student can't be there in person, there's a specific time they can get online and do synchronous learning with me, or I record my classes and I also have my materials online so that students that cannot be there live at all can still access the learning, and they can still access the courseware, and they can still access me by way of, YouTube recordings. Right. Let's talk about equity or equivalency. Learning should happen equally across all modalities. I do my best to make sure that my in-person and my online people have access to the same courseware, that they have access to the same LMS, to the same materials. Do we have a message? I don't know what that is. Oh, okay. I'm not, I'm sorry. I got a ding dong. Sorry. Reusability. So activities in the classroom can be captured or recorded and used for online learning. I do that, several times a week, and I have a unlisted YouTube playlist that I share with my students. It's unlisted for safety reasons, for security reasons, right? Um, if you guys want to take a look at that, please let me know. I can share that list with you by link. Um, Also reusability in the fact that since I'm using Canvas LMS, this is something, materials that can be carried over year after year and be built upon and available. Um, accessibility. Learners should have the technology and the skills to access all modes of learning, right? So that's part of my job is to facilitate that, to be a technology coach. So to make sure that my students can access this material. So which means they usually spend their first day or two with me in person, so I can make sure that they can access, the software and they're able to do what they need to do to learn. So that's not a barrier. Um, Now, teachers and learners both will need institutional support for technology and training. This is where I can come in and help you guys out. So if you need that support, if you need that training, I am a resource so if you want to establish something like this, I can help you guys do that. Um, So this is how I personally use it because different people use HyFlex in a lot of different ways. It really depends on their community. It really depends on their location, budget, the size of their institution. It really depends. So this is how I see HyFlex used in Salinas, at least for right now. So I have adapted it in the following manner. So for learner choice, the learner can participate in person, online synchronous, or online asynchronous. They can switch between modes. So some days I have people in person, and then the next day that same person might, meet with me, online. Equivalency and equity. A specific set of texts have been adopted to make sure that our learners have the same lessons. When I used to be an ESL teacher, I used HyFlex. I used the Standout book series, which is Cengage. I used Grammar and Action. Actually, all these were Cengage. Standout, Grammar and Action, the Heinle Picture Dictionary. For your institution, it might be a little different. Um, you know, Pick something essentially and be consistent. Um, I've used Aztec software. If you use Aztec software, I know some agencies do. So if you're using Edgenuity or Engine Learning or Burlington English or Ellie, whatever it may be, right? You adopt those texts, be consistent about it, and kind of stick with it. That way, everybody has the same access. A reusability. I record it using Google Meet, my classes. I post on a YouTube playlist. I post they're posted, course materials posted, reused, revised. I'm always revising on Canvas, and I'll show you something related to Canvas in a little bit. Accessibility in our community in the Salinas Valley. One thing I have learned from the very beginning when I started doing this is that the assumption is that learners will be using their phones. Not everybody has the access to a laptop or a desktop, but almost everybody has a phone. And so when you are designing and when your kind of systems of delivery, always assume that you are designing for a smartphone, right? So keep that in mind. Um, Now, usually as far as accessibility, so our program specialists, what they often do is they will orient on the whole program, matriculate, and the teacher is me, orients on the course itself, right? This is how you get through my course. This is, what you're going to be using. This is the schedule, so on and so forth, right? Um, I'm going to stop here. Any questions before I move on? So this is usually one of those because I've been prattling along. But does anybody have any questions here at this moment? As far as have you tried to use it? Um, has it been positive? Has it been negative? Has it just been kind of intimidating, right? Yeah, Francisco, I can't hear you. You're muted. No, no question. That was for something else. Okay. So Francisco, no question from Francisco. I can't hear you. Yeah, your mic is I'm not picking you up. So one moment. Oh, okay. You can't talk with interpretation. Okay. Oh, okay. You're translating. I got it. Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and continue. So now most of you who have seen or been exposed to HyFlex may have seen kind of community colleges or universities use it. And a lot of those guys are have ideal situations, what I call ideal situations. Oftentimes they're working from a desktop computer. They have two monitors, sometimes three. They have classroom speakers, and they have a third monitor or, smart board or view board facing out to the students in the class. They sometimes have a 180 degree or 360-degree rotating camera, for example, like the OWL meeting camera. Some of the instructors, they have a wireless lavalier mic, clipped to their collar, right? Or they're using a conference call mic, for example, a conference call like the Movo MC 1000, the one that you see in conference rooms all the time. Um, some of them have touch screen for switching sources, going back and forth, presentation controls, and of course, most importantly, the most valuable asset was is an actual another assistant to handle the technology for them. But we are not so lucky in our resources. So oftentimes it's usually one person that's going to do this, right? And I can show you guys how to do that. This is an example of a low budget. This is actually more realistically, and this is actually kind of what I've used before. So, for example, there's a touch screen, thank goodness. Um, sorry, sorry if my, oh, sorry, let me switch my connection real quick. For some reason, it took me to a it took me to my extender. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Let me go back. Um, I use a set of speakers, like just tiny little set of speakers out of pocket. Could be a Bluetooth one, whatever it might be. I use my personal smartphone, as oftentimes as a camera. I'll show you how that I set that up. Class projector, sometimes just an old-fashioned projector, or if I'm lucky, it's a smart screen. I have an HDMI cable that will connect. A drawing tablet, Wacom One. That's like the cheapest one you could get. It's like $30 or so. I bought a USB hub so I can kind of connect a couple of different things at the same time. And of course, one teacher to handle all the tasks. And that would be me. Let's take a look at how this so to update you guys, let's see how, what is needed to do this type of instruction. So you have physical classroom, right? And usually the students will be on their devices. So if it's classroom tablets, if it's classroom school issued Chromebooks or even their phones, right? Usually you have students in person and on their devices at the same time, so you all can see the same thing at the same time. Um, uh, Now, usually you have two devices. You have a broadcast device, and this is what you would run Zoom on, right? So this is what you would run um, Zoom or Google Meet or Big Blue Button, whatever you guys are using to broadcast. And so that could be a smartphone, it could be a laptop, right? Or the use of some kind of peripheral, like a camera of some sort, right? Um, Now, the other thing you device you would need is what I call a materials device. And this is where you're going to put your this is what you're going to put your actual materials on, the stuff that you want your students to learn. So, if you're using a whiteboard, right, or a chalkboard, then you would have a camera, right? It could be an owl camera or even a document cam. I've used the document cam before. It could be a second laptop or computer. I've used a student Chromebook before as my materials device. Basically, it's whatever it's you use that second camera, you know, to show what you want your students to learn, right? Now, in the classroom, the materials device could be capturing, what's happening if you're writing on a whiteboard or chalkboard, or even a smart board, and or it can be connected, connected by Bluetooth, or it can be connected, just a physical HDMI cable, right? I've done actually all of that. Um, Now, in the center, right, you have this digital classroom space, right? And this is where your physical classroom students and your online students can meet. And I've had that happen too when I was teaching ESL. So that, you're using Zoom or Google Meet or Canvas or the courseware, whatever the digital space that, you want your students to look at that point in time, right? And usually those are cloud-based apps, um, where everybody can meet both physically and in person, right? So I know this looks a little daunting. This is pretty much kind of the summary of what you would want when you're teaching HyFlex. Now, we don't always get this, and I understand that. I don't have my own classroom. I actually teach in the morning at Monterey County Works in Salinas, and then the evening I teach in somebody else's classroom at the Salinas Education Center. So I don't have my own classroom, so I often have to carry my class in my bag. Like I have like a rolling bag that I carry everything in. Right. So it can be done. You can be agile, you can be flexible, it can be done. So I'll show you a couple of setups that I have. And if this looks good, this is something your teachers, if you're a teacher, this is something you can do, or if you're a program assistant or administrator, this is something your teachers could do also. So this is kind of a stripped down setup. This is where I was in a temporary room at the beginning of this year. So I had access to a smart board. So here's my Chromebook. This is the Chromebook I was talking about. So it's the Acer Chromebook. It's connected to the smart board via HDMI cable, right? And then on a tripod, which cost me like, I don't know, cost me $9 out of pocket. I mounted my smartphone to use as my camera and my microphone. And so I just use my smartphone on that. I have a Galaxy uh, S22. I got a trade up this year. And so this is it. This is what I use. So pretty much, on my materials, on my laptop, I usually have Aztec software. I usually am using or Canvas, right? I have materials up on Canvas, or I'm using whatever app. Like I have a drawing app that I use for, to do math work on there. We're going really hard on math. It's amazing the leaps and bounds my students are making. So far, just last night, three or four of my students have taken their CASAs for math, and all of them have gone up a level. They've all gone up a level. And so it is working. This is working. Anyway, so this is a stripped down version. It could be done. And, I think these are materials that almost everybody can either get or they already have. Okay. So let's take a look at a second setup, right? an alternate one. Now, this one, let's say you don't have a smart board, right? Let's say you don't have a smart board, that's okay too, just as long as, so what we do here is we use our smartphone or whatever. It could be a second Chromebook, you know, tablet even, um, and it's pointed towards the whiteboard, towards the teacher, right? And the materials, device is not connected to anything. It's just kind of standing by itself. Now, I will tell you this, both the materials device and the smartphone are both using Google Meet. So pretty much I'm in Google Meet twice, right? So one I'm using on the materials device, oh, I'm sorry, on the broadcast device, I'm using the full, mode, right? I'm in control of the room. That's what I'm doing on the phone. My materials device, I can manage the room from my phone. Now, the materials device, I have in presentation mode. I have in present mode for Google Meet. And so and now I'm presenting to the digital classroom at home. People at the whiteboard, they, basically, this is me standing in front of the whiteboard, just doing stuff. Now, however, if I really wanted to, and I've done this before, there's been times when I haven't had a smart board or a whiteboard where I had my students just get on their phones or their computers and just look at what I was doing on my Chromebook. And so we all just all we just all kind of were doing that, right? So it's very, very flexible, right? And it has a lot of room for creativity here, right? Now, I'm going to show you one more configuration, and this is I used to have this when I had my own classroom. So if you have instructors that share a classroom on a persistent basis, a consistent basis, or if you're a teacher that has their own room, this is a way that you can set up. So for example, you have your materials device, right? And that's what you're going to have your whatever you're teaching, right? And then you have it connected to some kind of broadcast device, right? In this case, we have access to an owl. We only have like one or two, but we have one. And that's a combination camera, mic, and speaker. And so that's connected to the computer, and the owl is capturing what I'm doing on the whiteboard or the smart board, right? It's also capturing because it's got a 360-degree angle. It's also capturing everybody in the class, which is why you want a unlisted YouTube playlist because you're dealing with adults and you do have some people in there that have restraining orders on other people. So, you definitely want to be careful with that. And so the only way to get to that YouTube playlist is by having a Canvas account through me. And so I do that for security reasons. Actually, periodically, when I start recording, I do a disclaimer. I will say, okay, this video is not meant to be shared with the public. It's for the students of Salinas Adult School, specifically Mr. Gomez's HSE class. This video will be put on a unlisted YouTube playlist, like at the beginning, right? Um, and that actually does calm down some nerves, right? Um, and so I have, a desktop computer, sometimes my laptop, Owl capturing whatever's happening in the classroom, the smart board. And then, of course, we have that shared digital space. And that's what once the thing that's the thing about HyFlex is one thing you see is that we all in all these examples, you have the digital classroom connecting everybody. How you want to use that. If you want to do ESL and you want to do conversation practice, cool. I've done that before. I've created breakout rooms and I've had students in twos and threes and sometimes fours, practice, right? And then we come back from breakout and, and then do that, right? I learned how to do that during the pandemic, uh, you know, I've had situations where I had in-person students, and then I had one student on a laptop, and I took the laptop and I put it on the table next to the other student, so the online student could be at the same table as the other ones. And so everyone, it was almost like it was weird. It was kind of a weird moment, right? Um, so it is very important, right? It can be done. It's not impossible. And if you've tried it and it didn't quite work, you may want to try it again, right? And try a different way of doing it. There are some pros and cons. I'm going to tell you right now. I'm just going to remind you. So remember, some of the things you need reliable Wi-Fi. You need to have a Wi-Fi connection, especially if they want to participate. Hardware access, even though smartphones can be used, and it is foremost in my planning, my lesson planning, a laptop or desktop with printer access is ideal. Sorry about that. Technology curve, right? As far as ESL, it's been really successful with high, intermediate, advanced learners doing, because of their ability to acquire the skills needed to operate the hardware. And language and literacy is not a barrier usually. When you get to the lower levels where, you know, you may run into some issues. Access to materials. I do my best to provide equal things. It's not perfect, but I strive to, right? In-person learners may have a slight advantage. They might have the actual textbooks to use in the classroom, right? And so online learners, they need a way to get materials in a cost-effective manner. Um, a way I've kind of done that as far as an update, I now use Aztec software as my main curriculum, and then I kind of design around that, right? I don't follow it, but I kind of have my own plan for Aztec because I don't like their sequence. But I do use it to kind of hang my hat on to tie it all together, right? And I do use a physical book. It's called Number Power. It's an old one, right? Yeah, Francisco's like, yeah, I know that one. Um, and conversation, right? Group conversation takes a noticeable hit. Um, Elisa Takaichi from OTAN has noted this too. She's mentioned this during her HyFlex workshop. Sometimes, that social aspect does kind of take a dive. However, the is very much outweighed by the student's ability to access that learning. You know, it really caters to people, especially if they need to talk to a teacher, if they need to see a teacher. It's not enough just to do independent study. It's good to see a face, even if it's just once a week, or even if it's my face. I mean, you got to see this once a week. I mean, who wants that, right? But they're glad to see it. It really works well with listen and repeat exercises. They can currently enroll in other courses. For example, a GED student or a HiSET student could also be taking an ESL or citizenship class, right? Um, those without reliable transportation or who have mobility issues or can still participate. Let's say you live in Prunedale or East Garrison, or if you're down in if you live in Bradley, right? um, you could still participate, right? I've had students from as far north as Gilroy participate, and as far south as King City participate in my classes. Um, if they live in noisy homes, right? They could still do it, right? Um, Scheduling costs us is still tenable in person. It can be done. I just, let my students know in advance. I have a systems for that in place. Space considerations, they could be held in a smaller place. I could be in I could be in a room that's meant for maybe five other people and I could still do it. I could do this from my car. I've done this from my car. I've run this class. I've sat in the hallway and taught this class. I could do this outdoors. Actually, during the pandemic, I would do it outdoors. Um, and so even though I've not done it, collaboration is also possible, right? So just know as I have gone through this, I have learned quite a bit since I first was exposed to this it must have been 2022. Um, and so I have been doing this since 2022. Um, let's see. Questions. How can we achieve equal access to instructional materials? Right? Can access be provided like other models, like telelearning? Did anybody take a telelearning course? You got a book, you had a teacher, you met once a week, you watched something on public television, right? I've done it. Um, what's the most efficient way to equip older classrooms? I've answered that question actually. So you just have to be very portable with your stuff. Um, what about instructional design, professional development? You know, what does institutional support look like, right? And of course, well, this is post-COVID, but how can we make HyFlex less dependent on one specific instructor? Like if something were to happen to me, or if I retired, or I moved on, would somebody be able to pick up what I do, right away, right? Or if I needed a sub. I was on medical leave for almost a week, a couple weeks ago, right? I had a small surgery, and so I was out for like a week. And then I had a sub, but I could not do the same things that he could not do the same things that I could do, right? Now, here's my question, and this is kind of advocacy on the side of the teachers. This is teacher advocacy now. If there's such is there such thing as instructor choice as there is with learner choice? If instructors have the same level of flexibility as the students, how can HyFlex meet those different teaching styles? For example, if let's say the teacher is neurodivergent, I am neurodivergent, I have autism. And so having a medium between me and my students like has made a huge difference in the quality of my work. The pandemic actually made me a better teacher, not a worse one. Because of that. So when I came back into the classroom with, with the computer between me and the students, that was a huge game changer, right? It's allowed me to stay in this career for longer. Um, so um, here we go. Questions before I kind of show off one thing that I want everyone to see real quick. Any questions from me?